Welcome back to the Better Men, Better Ball Player podcast. I'm your host, Trey Cobb. I want to thank you for joining us here on our 81st episode of the podcast, where we get a chance to talk to sports performance coach at Salisbury University, Coach Matt Nein. Coach Nein is current coordinator of sports performance and assistant athletic director at Salisbury University. He is the 2018 National Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year from the National Strength and Conditioning Coach Association. He was the finalist for the NSCA College Strength Coach of the Year in 2016 and 17 as well. He oversees the training program of 21 varsity teams. During his tenure as coordinator, he has the opportunity to work with 14 national championship teams, 8 individual national championship athletes, and over 340 All-Americans. Prior to Salisbury, he also spent time as a strength and conditioning coach of the Toronto Blue Jays. So, Coach Nein at Salisbury, just tremendous wealth of knowledge. Guy that just gets it, guy that keeps it simple, and is all about relationships and continuing to give lessons and teach beyond the weight room and helping other programs. So, loving to get into this. Known Coach Nein for about 20 years now, and it's just really great to be able to talk to him. I think going down this avenue and seeing the benefits of strength conditioning coach and how they do and how they can help, and again, just broadening people's eyes and knowledge of this, because it's so valuable now, and seeing what kind of skills they can actually be taught through the weight room is extremely important, and this is exactly what this is all about. So, Coach Nein, appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Also, can't thank those guys at Netting Pros enough as well. The guys at Will Minor, Netting Pros, they're improving programs one facility at a time. Netting professionals specialize in the design, fabrication, installation of custom netting for backstops, batting cages, dugouts, scoreboards, BP screens, and ball carts. They also design and install digital graphic, wall padding, windscreen, turf protectors, dugout benches, and dugout cubbies, and more. Netting professionals continue to provide quality products and services to many recreation, high school, and college fields, facilities, and stadiums throughout the country. Contact Will Minor. Contact the guys at Netting Pros at 844-620-2707 or info@nettingpros.com. Visit them online at www.nettingpros.com or check out Netting Pros on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for all your latest products and projects. So again, can't thank those guys enough. Will Minor and those guys. Can't thank you guys. Coach Nein, appreciate you, man. Everyone else, enjoy this. Some very, very valuable information from Coach Nein at Salisbury University.
The value of sports psychology or psychology in general, man, it's huge, and I think it's starting to see a little bit growth, a lot more growth now. There's a lot of great, from Brian Kane and Hannah Huseman and these social medias being able to put it out there, that the high benefits of seeking these individuals. You look at Major League Baseball and the value that they're putting to it. And, one of our guys works with Toronto, and, each one of their teams has a mental performance coach with them, through their minor league system.
Mm-hmm.
It's important.
How much? So that's why, that's a big reason that, I'm interested in talking to you and seeing how much, your program, like, do you, are you able to dive into some of that with these guys, like when you get them?
Yeah, so obviously it's different. It's probably not, to the individual.
Right. Not to the specific, maybe. Right. But what,
and a lot of what we're looking at is more tools in which that they can then hopefully take, example, one of the things right now, during football season, and we had 12 penalties over each game of the past 2 games. Right. And so I got to reflect on my program and look back and say, okay, where are we losing out on like the little things, so now we're eyeballing like certain sessions, things within a session, where did we follow the exact order in the way in which it was, addressed and taught, pre allowing them to go out, right? In the pre-lift, when we talk about, how we're going to go about doing this, right? Like those little details, like, is it those little things, right? That are, so as a coach, like I'm reflecting on that in my training sessions, even more like right now, because I'm not a big fan of this data that's showing where our opponent, we're almost 6 times greater the amount of penalties than our opponents. Like that's an issue, right? So even with baseball, same concept. Like when we're stepping up to the rack, can we go through what our mental routine is? So like what is your routine that gets you back into, right, the next pitch, right, or the one, whatever's next, right? If you're a pitcher, like that next pitch, not dwelling on the past, like we can still use that. We can use that to our advantage in the weight room. And as we step up to the rack to do our lift, I want to see it. We had a talk with one of our teams the other day about this concept, and I want to visually be able to see it. Like we're not joking, this is right, because you're going to get in this situation, so we can start hopefully relating it to the situation that they see out on the field, and it becomes normal, right? It becomes not, because a lot of times what happens is people just don't do it, right? They don't think about it because it's not ingrained enough, right? It's just like skill work that you do, right? I mean, if you don't do it, obviously you're probably not going to do it in the game. It's just not going to magically happen. So we got to find the opportunities, and that's my job as a coach, to find the opportunities to utilize that. So, some of the things that we'll do, I like it's a fun game or activity. It's called the Tower of Hanoi. And so this is kind of like, we do it generally in like week 3, 4. So like right now, like it's going to start coming about with our teams, week 3, 4 of training. So generally about week 5 of school, we start this, and it's an actual game that we do between teams and compete against teams. But the concept behind it, the Tower of Hanoi, basically we use a 45-pound plate, 25, 10, 5, 2.5, right? And they're stacked one on top of the other. And then you have 3 pegs, like we use boxes, right? 3 on a ladder, right? 3 boxes. And you got to get that whole stack to look just like that on the 3rd peg or the 2nd peg, whatever I choose, right? So let's say we got to get it on the 3rd peg. Now your rules behind this, right? You can only move 1 plate at a time, and a big plate cannot go on top of a little plate, right? So if you had that 2.5 at the top, right, you got to move that. Now the 5 can't go on the 2.5. It has to go into the empty space, right? Now you have the 10. The 10 can't go on either of the 2, right? So you got to move the 2.5 first, right? Now what ends up happening, and what we've seen with this game, is that the way in which we talk about it, right, because we're competing against other teams, right? It's in our Iron Sammy challenge where we compete against other teams. And so this is a mental challenge to figure out which team can get the fastest done in this activity. So as soon as we added the competition onto it, other things start to fade away, right? In terms of the process, right? And all they want to do is win the game. And by winning the game, they think, I just got to move plates. I got to move. And what ends up happening, they fail to think about the most important thing, which is the next pitch, right? The next play, the next move of the plate. It's the exact same concept, right? Because if I move it in the wrong spot, I'm screwed, right? I am, because all of a sudden, well, I was supposed to get it on the 3rd pin, but it's all on the 2nd because of the one move, right? And it's the next move, right? Every single time. I mean, we'll have guys go through this, and when we first introduce it, especially with our younger crew, we'll introduce it and they're spending 4, 5, 6 minutes, right? Then I do it and talk about it, and I am done in 26 seconds, right? Now, and they're like, oh, well, you know what you're doing. It's like, I don't put them anywhere you want. I don't care, right? I'll still be done in 26 seconds or less, right? It doesn't matter to me because I understand the value of the process and the very next move, right? And just like in baseball, the very next pitch is the most important one. I remember, standing out on the mound as a pitcher, right? Yeah, you can't control what the umpire is going to say, right? And so if I'm flustered or frustrated, and same thing in this game, I'm just throwing the ball, right? I'm not truly pitching at this point, right? So I got to dial in mentally, right, and actually pitch, right? Or as a as a lefty who was throwing, 80 on a great day, right? In college, 80, 85. If I leave that over the plate, that ball's hit very, very hard, very, very far, right? And so I can't let that happen, right? And so we can use this game as an introduction, right? When you think about it, it has nothing to do with baseball, right, whatsoever. But at the end of the day, it does, right? And so it's then how do you as the coach bring that all back in that moment? But then how do you use that, right, over the next course of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks, at week 10? How are we still framing that same concept in week 10, right? And that's where we can talk about using, that, stepping up onto the rack and you're going through your mental routine to focus on the very next rep, right? Now, other things that we'll do is we have bar speed measures, right? So we use, they go onto our bar so that we can measure how fast the bar is moving, right? And what some other things that we'll see is, guys will step up onto the rack, right? And let's say they're squatting, and we need to see it in between a certain zone, right? So I want it, between like a 0.8 and a 1.3 meters per second, right? And what'll happen is that the first rep happens at 0.8, and then the second rep happens at a 1.1, and then the third rep happens at a 1.3. And it's like, Coach, I got better, right? I went faster as I went on. But my question to you is, why wasn't a 1.3 is what you're capable of? Why wasn't a 1.3 at the very first one, right? And usually what it is because they lacked focus right off the bat. What happens if we lose focus right off the bat on the mound, right? Or at the plate, right? Like those types of things. So it's being able to relate those concepts together in that moment. So they weren't necessarily focused on the very first rep, right? And then they started focusing on the second one because they weren't happy with the first one, right? But they weren't trying to necessarily make that the best one because obviously the next one was even better than that. Right. And so how do we change that? How do we change the attitude and mindset that we take? So when you step up onto that rack, that first one is the best one, right? And then the second one is the best one, and it still may be better, right? And that's okay, right? But that first one, when you look at them, as a coach, and you've been seeing them, you can tell when somebody's in it and somebody's not quite in it, right? And so you could tell like they just didn't have it. I mean, and I don't know what it is, but it wasn't there. And then in rep 2 and 3, it was, right? And so whether that's the competitive fire or whatever it is that makes you want to train and want to work. So, I mean, there's a lot of cool ways that you can do it, but I think it's got to be intentional. And we've got to figure out, okay, if we're going to introduce this in week 4 training, we got to figure out how in week 6, 8, and 10, we're still going to use that concept. And those are some of the ways, right? We'll use that then. Right. So anyway, kind of going back to that real quick, just so you understand the game, and what we'll talk about at the end then is, well, if you start to figure out the process is basically you need to figure out the end of it, right? You need to figure out where does the 45 need to get, and that dictates where every other plate will go, right? Because you can only move them in 2 spots. So if the 45 has to go at the end, the 25 in the middle, the 10 on the right, right? The 5 in the middle, the 2.5 has to start on the outside. And that's the only way that your movements are going to work correctly from the beginning. If you move that 2.5, right, that's the very next play, right? So we move the 2.5 to the end and the 5 in the middle. Obviously, the easiest one because you have to move the 10 has to go somewhere, so the 2.5 has to move, right? Now all of a sudden the 10's on the outside. You have a 2.5 and a 5 stacked in the middle. Well, what's the next move? Is the 5's got to go on the 10. I can't put the 2.5 on the 10 because then the 5 has to go back on the 25, and we're wasting effort at that point, right? So I'm focusing on what's most important next. The 2.5 has to go on the 25, so the 5 can get on the 10, and then the 2.5 can go on top of the 5. That clears the middle for the 25, right? Can you see the process? I don't know, like that. We're focusing on the little things, the small things. Right. So again, now we're focusing on the concept of what's the process, right, to becoming the best athlete possible, right, and the little things and stuff like that, right. So that's one concept. Now, the other things we'll talk about, and this one was pretty cool. We did this one and we just had a jar, right, and it's the power of the penny, right. And so I'll ask you, if I don't know if you've heard this one or not. I've been doing it for a little while, so I don't know if you did, but so if you see a penny on the ground, you pick it up.
Yeah,
you do. Right.
Yeah.
So when I do this, like in a large group, like I may have 3 or 4 of you, right? But like the other 25 will not. And then you always have like 2 or 3 that, if it's heads up, right? And they're talking about this concept called luck. And I'm like, there's no such thing as luck. It's effort and hard work and the attitude and mindset, things that you can control, right? That's where luck comes in, right? So there really isn't.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, whole nother story, right? So anyway,
Absolutely.
most
Right,
people
right,
say
right.
no, right? And the real reason why they won't pick the penny up is because it has no value, right? In the moment, one penny will buy you absolutely nothing. But it's the compound effect of multiple pennies when added together, right? So we always talk about, all right, well, how many, if you see a dollar bill or on the ground, do you pick that up? And yeah, every single hand goes up on that one. I said, well, why? Well, I can actually do something with that, right? Like, okay, so let's relate this back to sport now, right? So, how often, like, you want to win the conference championship or the national championship, right? That's like finding a dollar bill on the ground, right? Because you can go out and just, lollygag through practice, not work very hard, right? Possibly still win a championship, right? There's just highly skilled athletes, right? But what happens if you work on the process, right? The little things, right? And we say these pennies, right, add up. If the 1 + 1 and you keep adding them up will equal $1. They will guarantee you the more you pick up, the closer to $1 you will get, right? And we're saying dollar is success in this concept. And so for every penny, every small little thing that you do has the ability to add to your pot to get you to success, right? Now, you talk about like gambling, like if the concept of gambling, like if somebody's going to come to you with an offer, right? You have an 80% chance versus a 40% chance. Which one do you take?
80.
Right? You're going to take the 80. Now you still can lose, right? You still have a 20% chance of losing, right? But I have a 60% on the other. Now I have a 40% chance of still winning. I'm going to bet on the one that I can get, at 80%. And that bucket is full. That 80% is full of the small little things, right? The process, the little pieces. So what we did is we had this jar, right? And basically anytime you saw change on the ground, you had to pick it up and bring it in, right? So we lift 3 days a week, right? And just bring it. I don't care what it is, right? Just put it in the jar. So we even had a $5 poker chip from a casino over in DC, the Baltimore, DC area. It found its way in there, but you know what? Whatever. At the end, so we did this for 10 weeks. At the end of 10 weeks, we had like $26 in there, right? Well, 21 and then a $5 poker chip, right? So now at that, we also then had giving day, right? At Salisbury. So all of a sudden, when we took that $26, it was matched, right? So when a student or an alumni or a staff member put that into a program, right, it would be matched. So all of a sudden, $26, right, now became what, 52, right? And just like that, in 10 weeks, the small little pennies that you were picking up now became something valuable that we could actually use, right? So it was a great model, to show that, especially for those who don't believe, right? Those who don't think it's important, like, whatever, I don't have to do this today, I'll do it tomorrow, and then never gets done tomorrow. And they do the one little thing here and there, right? It just doesn't add up, right? And so again, just another way to add that in. And it wasn't, it's stuff that we talk about like every week, every Monday, we'd have it, the tally of how much we were having. And all of a sudden, like now guys were like looking for money, like it was something and they were picking that up. Well, then the whole concept is like, if you're willing to walk over the little things in life that guarantee you success, you're not going to be very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so each one of these pennies or small change, right, is now a reminder to you on the process, right? That the process, right, will guarantee you success, right? Or at least put you at a higher percentage, right? The greater opportunity, right? You may still lose, right? But you can, at the end of the day, you will not be able to say, oh, I wish I would have, right? Mm-hmm. That was me as a player, right? I wasn't very good. I threw 80, 85 miles an hour, 85 on a great day. At Division I, my first 3 years, I played 7 innings total, right? I redshirted, I played none, I played 7. 4 of the 7 came in one outing. I played 3 innings in 51 games, right? That's not a lot, right? But I valued the process. Like I knew I could play, or I wouldn't have been there, right? I wouldn't have made the team for 3 consecutive years. I just found somebody else. And, but I worked hard. I pushed. I wanted to make sure that if I got the chance, I left nothing to chance, right? It was, I don't even call it muscle memory, but it was just one of those things like you did every little bit of everything. So it became natural when the time was there. And, I get a start. I take a no-hitter into the 7th, get my first victory. I go up against UNC Chapel Hill. I threw a complete game shutout for the first time in, I think, 132 games that they had been shut out. All of a sudden, I was the number 4 starter. I threw every fourth game Sunday. Became team captain and opening day starter, number 1 my senior year, right? And this stuff just doesn't happen, but they're great, again, using those concepts, right? And talking about the process and things that I would do every day, to watching my own film, and coach he just put it in the VCR, because that's what we had back then, put it in the VCR, and he would just go about his day. Like his time wasn't, he's a good coach, but I don't, his time, it wasn't worth investing in me, right? Investing in other better players. But then all of a sudden you could start to see a little bit more change when things happen, like more investment, because I was invested in things like that. So, again, you just never know. And I never wanted to be an athlete that said, well, what if I would have? If I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that, like, man, just go freaking do it. Like, why leave it to chance like that? And, especially, to me, I think it drove my passion around the game, even deeper in the game of baseball. And it's how I got into the field I'm in now, right? Because I knew the things that I could control was my strength, my power, right? My fitness level, right? And so started focusing on nutrition, right? And I dropped, I think, like 20 pounds, right? And, strength, focused on that piece, right? And again, the things that I could control, I was never going to control him putting me in the game, right? Mm-hmm. So we things that we talk about here at Salisbury with our athletes, we say there's 5 components to becoming the best athlete possible, right? You've got to lift, right? You got to work on your strength. You got to work on your power. You got to work on your endurance, right? We got to condition. We got to run, right? So whether that's speed work, right, or conditioning, we have to do it, right? Even agility, right? We got to recover. I think this is one that's almost lost the most, is that we got to sleep, right? You're 1.75 times more likely to get injured if you're sleeping less than 8 hours a day. Jeez. Like, all you got to do is go to bed, right? Put the phone down, shut the computer, and get in the bed, right? Close your eyes and you're good to go. It puts you at a better chance of being on the field and playing. Like, why would you not do that? So recovery, nutrition is in there as well, right? You got to play the game, right? So you got to work on the skills, right? The process skills of playing the game, right? So whatever the drill work is, you name it, you got to work on those things, right? And then the mental skills development, and you can be a great athlete, right? And the equation for like optimal athlete, right, is you have athletic abilities, right? And that's the ability to run and strength and power and things like that, right? But then you got to have a set of skills, right? But then you also have to have that mental piece, right? You could have an athlete who's highly skilled, right? Highly athletic, right? You see a lot of them, right? You probably see a fair amount, right? Oh, yeah. But then they lose the mental piece, right? And they're slamming the bat and, cranking it out, wood bat, cranking it over the knee or something, like they just absolutely lose it, So, yeah, that's all part of it. And so I think that's a huge piece that we have the ability to dabble in, right? And that's really all it is that we do. And, we're not the mental performance coach, but we have that opportunity to sprinkle that in. And I think that's where a lot of coaches are, right? You are a mental performance coach. You are a nutritionist, right? You are a strength and conditioning professional in some context, right? Like, how do you value strength and conditioning? If you devalue it, do you think your players are going to really see any reason to go do it? So, yeah, like, I'm not expecting you to be the best strength and conditioning coach, but to have that just a little bit, right? That's all it is. And that's what we have is, so reading some books and listening to podcasts and things like that, and taking these concepts and say, okay, how can I relate them to our program, right? I remember playing Tower of Hanoi as a kid. And, it was 3 little wooden pegs, and you had these little wood, and that was what we did. And I have no idea where that even came from in terms of how that became an activity, but it really was like, you started doing it, it's like, man, this is a freaking mental. It really is. You look at it, you can get it done in, I think, 32 moves, something like that. And all of a sudden I got guys sitting here for 6 minutes doing this thing. There's got to be something going on here. Like, so we dive into it and figure like, this is great. And this is a great intro, right? To focus on what's most important next. And then we can use it as we go. So it's finding those as a coach.
And you're able to find those during your lifts, like
well, this is a 2 minute. Well, for most people, like I said, the average is probably 2.5 minutes, right? To 3 minutes. But there's always that outlying group that takes 6. And what's pretty cool with this is, the pressure that picks up, right? And so all of a sudden you're looking over and this group said done, right? Because they're clocked, right? And then this group done, and all of a sudden you're like, we haven't even moved our 45 plate yet, And all of a sudden, so now like this pressure, right? So it opens up more doors, right? Okay, how do we handle pressure? Like, what did you feel like, right? So instead of just giving yes, no questions, like what did you feel out of this group at the end? So is it worth taking 6 minutes now to introduce the concept of pressure? Absolutely, right? So when we step onto the field, like we understand it. Well, how do we deal with that? Like, what would have been a better way for us to deal with that pressure, right? That we were facing. And so, even in some of our activities that we'll do, we put them in pressure situations, like when we're conditioning, so that I know baseball, I'm thinking, for the game of lacrosse, working with lacrosse athletes as well, is that, you play man up. Like, so you play a small sided game where you're already down 2, right? You're playing you got 6 minute game and you're already down 2 to start. Okay. Like, what's the mental process? Like, what are you focusing on? Sometimes like I felt like I had to score, like, and I had to press and I had to push, but why? You can't score 3 goals at once, right? You can't score 3 runs it just, you got to play the simple part, play the process, right? The little things, the next pitch, focus on doing what your job is, right? If that's getting the ball to the right side of the field so you can advance a runner, then that's what you need to do, right? We're not trying to, but unfortunately, I think the game of baseball is lost is everybody thinks they can hit the big one, right? And they're gonna hit the 3-run homer to win it all, and then they end up striking out, sitting on the bench, and we leave runners on first and second, and so you can incorporate it in, and they don't take a long time, they really don't. 5-6 minutes, I think that's worth it. Even all the way down to like culture, another one we do is commitment. We assess commitment. Right. Even the game of baseball, right? It's a huge statistic game, right? How many times have you heard or seen anybody evaluate, and give you a percentage of your level of commitment, right? There's a book, Jeff Jansen, Commitment Continuum, right? And a great book. And it really starts to dive into this concept. And so we've adapted it and modified it to what we want to see, right? But, we're all worried about, players are worried about stats, coaches are worried about stats, yet the one thing that's probably the most important is your level of commitment to being the best athlete possible, right? If you don't work very hard, obviously, like, your skills are probably not going to get that much better, right? Now, they may, but, if you take, out of 25 players, you might have like 2 or 3 who grow, in a quality, incremental fashion, where others, they got a little bit better and they get a little bit worse, right? Didn't really improve. You could probably rattle that off. And that is the bell curve, right? You'll have a little who got better, a majority who didn't do anything, and a couple who got worse, right? Well, that's not good, right? Who wants that, right? We want to see continued growth and continued improvement. Well, it all starts with your level of commitment to becoming the best athlete you can become. Well, you've got to define that, right? And so it starts coming out of core values. Like, what are your values as a coach? Like, what values do you have, right? What values? And we have values in our weight room. Our very first value is attitude, right? The attitude you bring every day is going to initiate, right, the outcome, right? We use the concept E plus R equals O, event plus response equals outcome, right? And so your attitude is the first driver of that. And, we meet all of our teams outside of the weight room before they come in for that very reason, right? We can assess and analyze the attitude and create that before we step into the door, right? Right above our door, we have, it's called the edge, right? And then the edge is where average ends and elite begins, right? So it's a great concept to mentally focus on the attitude when we understand what the edge means. And as soon as you walk in that door, we're stepping over the edge because we're willing to become better than the next, right? And that's the culture, right? Is that it starts before you walk in. And again, you're in the weight room. You guys were in at 6 a.m., right? Who wants to be there? You much rather be in your bed, right? Sleeping, right? And again, there's times for that, and there, but no matter what, like you may have just failed an exam and you're lifting at 3:00, right? Well, are you willing to stay in the the mountain of average? Are you ready to freaking walk off that edge and get after it? Again, that's a lot of our teams. I mean, baseball, there's no reason. I mean, looking at how successful Salisbury baseball has been over the past 22 years, right? 21 years, I think, the NCAA tournament, like there's a reason, I mean, you look at, and you were there, you were through it, and you look at the teams after you and the team just winning the national championship. We had 2 players on the field who were walk-ons, right? I mean, freaking grinders, these dudes. I mean, like that's it. Like they focused on the little things. They jumped on board and they brought everybody with them, and having Coach Sires there and Coach Brohan with his knowledge and the leadership abilities that Coach Sires brings. I mean, man, it's a freaking recipe for amazing stuff to happen. And it did, right? And so I mean, it's there, right? It's just, and there's plenty of articles, books, things like that, and you got to figure it out. When can you adapt these things and bring them to the table to make your players better?
Will you ever have those conversations, like let's say with Brohan and Sires, or maybe something that they're like looking at, or like, hey, we're struggling with this, or is that really just from you watching all the sports and kind of having a feel for where they kind of need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. Looking at like for women's lacrosse, just looking at the group like a few years ago, there was just something was missing. And the cool thing with us is in sport performance is that we're with them a lot in the off season where our coaching staff isn't, right? And so because of that, like we could just go in and lift, right? But everybody's doing that, right? I always talk to our athletes about, kind of the difference between average and elite, right? Elite think differently, act differently, and do differently, right? And there's a lot of average people, right? They're okay with just doing the average, right? But don't tell me you want to be a national champion, right? And then give me average, right? And this goes back to the commitment continuum, is we can assess that, right? We can set standards, right? So coming out of your values, like what are your standards? So what does attitude look like in the weight room, and how can we measure that, right? Coach Sires always tell you, got to measure it, right? And so all right, how do we measure that, right? Finding different ways, right? You see a lot of values of like teamwork. Well, how do you measure that every day? Right. One of the things we do is we count high fives, right? We look at research related to body contacts, right? And there was a study done in the NBA that looked at body contacts, and they counted them for, I think, the first like week or 2 weeks of the season. They let the season play out. And sure enough, the 2 teams that had the most body contacts were the 2 teams in the NBA finals, right? The team that had the least, right, were the 2 worst records in the game. Right? I mean, and again, that's one study, but then you start looking at, touch and things like that, and the great benefits of that. And all right, well, here's a great way to measure that. You want to build team unity, start high-fiving one another. Right. And early on, the teams were, they were like manufacturing it. Didn't matter, right? Because they were connecting. Right? And that's all that mattered. If they connected over they thought that something was funny or awkward or weird, like, I don't care. It's connecting. It doesn't matter to me. Right. To now where the team is like, get your touches in, right? It's now like a thing. Like, this is just what we do, right? We connect, we bond, right? And then the other things we can use that with is like feedback, right? And so we want to make sure we close it out, right? Because a lot of times, especially, even then, 14 to 22-year-olds, right? They take offense to it, right? They don't know how to handle feedback. Coach doesn't know what he's talking about, or I'm not listening to you. Like, who do you think you are as a player, right? And without the values, without having a vision of where you want to go, those problems are going to exist, right? But as soon as we have a vision and we have values that start to drive our decisions, right, of what we do to help reach this vision, I can hold you accountable, right, as a teammate, right? If I don't really like what you're doing, I can hold you accountable because We've all agreed that this is what we need to do, right? And it's the bigger process. It's not win the championship, right? It's become a better teammate today, right? Become a better person, things along that line, right? Well, when you're over here dragging others down, right? I can say something, but we want to close it out with a body contact because we understand the value of unity, the value of family is that I'm not just going to let it go. I'm not going to say this and then move away. Right? I'm going to say it and say, hey, you know what? This body contact, whether it's a hug or a high five, means that I still love you. Right? It's creating that environment where it's okay to give feedback, both positive and negative, but you got to close it out. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a high five. It could be a hand on the shoulder. Right? I would talk with an athlete and put my hand on and say, hey, you know what? We got to work on this movement. Right? We got to sit our hips back. Right? Be a little better. Right? And go. And this, because we delivered that concept of what that means, is this means that I love you, right? By me putting my hand on your shoulders, that I love you so much that I want to see you get better, right? I know that you're capable of doing it, right? So we got to make that connection because they'll make the connection differently. There was an activity that was done. It's things to do with like teammates and things, right? As we were at a clinic and they had to take a selfie, right, of an expression. And then your partner had to tell you what that was. I venture to say probably like 90% of the time it was wrong, right? And so the way you were seeing something was not the same way I was seeing something, right? Or what I was doing was not the same in which you were perceiving that. Well, if that's the case, then we got to make sure that we're you can have your perceptions and that's fine, but we need to make sure that we're clarifying everything in what we do. So that everybody's on the same path, right? And that's what it's all about. And again, lead out of love, man. That's where it's at.
Lead out of love. I guess, Coach. You have your handle on all the programs, so that's really taking, just kind of seeing where. Let's kind of put your hat on. Maybe it's a high school coach. Guy who maybe has to, they might have a weightlifting coach, and typically probably that weightlifting coach probably does the same thing for everybody. So you might need to take more on your own and take more ownership. Well, I guess what would your advice be for that when you're thinking about, taking a program into the high school ranks? Maybe they don't have the resources that you have of having a strength coach. What is maybe the best bang for their buck?
I mean, to be honest, I think that the biggest thing is stay simple, right? I mean, you think about the athletes that you have, and what are their capabilities? Like, what are their abilities? Like, where are they at now? What is the one thing that they need the most, right? And again, it's simple. And we talk about this with our GAs, right? They've got all this knowledge and they don't have a lot of experience and they want to do this. And they just read this article and want to incorporate all that stuff into it. But the athletes don't need that, right? I mean, from a simple assessment, right? I think assessment is critical, right? You got to understand where you are to understand where you want to go, right? If you don't have that, you're just aimlessly floating around and who knows what happens, right? So having some general levels of assessment, whatever that is, I mean, some of the stuff that's out there now is you don't have to 1RM, right? You can do 3-5, you can do mid-thigh iso pulls, you can do sub-maximal testing, so there's a lot of different ways in which it can be done. Just figuring out what works for you guys and what we need, right? And then a lot of times what we see especially out of the youth or the freshmen that come into our program is they lack the basics, right? They lack simple mechanics, right? They lack general strength. They go to these places and they want to do all this like sport specific activity and you got these bands like everywhere on your body and you're like doing some sort of weird mechanical thing. I was watching one the other day. It was like a catcher. He had it on his forearm, each forearm, and then like each calf, right? And he's like popping out and like his mechanics of throwing were wrong. And like, this is like I think he was like 16. So he would be maybe a junior to something like that, sophomore to junior in high school. And it's like, is this really what this kid needs right now? And if we put him up on a vert mat, and test his vert, I guarantee you it's probably not where it needs to be, right? So his power output's bad, right? Or broad jump, whatever it is, right? So his power output's good, right? So, or not good. So why does he need to be in these contraptions, right? All this fancy stuff, right? The guy just needs simple, explosive work, right? And I was talking with one of my GAs yesterday about power development in plyometrics. And they're doing all these plyometrics, but they're just doing them, right? They're not actually, the coach is just watching. They're not actually intent of coaching, right? And what I mean by that is what you see in these plyometrics is you'll see somebody, they'll go down and they'll spend so much amount of time down there that they're losing extra force production because they're not activating the stretch reflex or optimizing the stretch reflex. And so we want to see that rapid snap down, that rapid lengthening, right, of the muscles on the posterior chain, right, glutes into the hamstrings, because that's going to be our concentric or the explosion forward. Well, that's a mechanism that's trainable. If we don't train it, we're producing force, which is good, but the name of the game for the drill is produce force rapidly. That's a plyometric, right? And so we're losing half the battle here. And yeah, but we did plyometrics, but you didn't do them with detail, right? That was an average type of mindset that the coach was taking towards that, where we're constantly on them about ground contact time, right? I mean, we could do them until we're blue in the face, but at that poor level, but we want to focus and really dive into the mechanical aspects, right? And so again, you've been doing plyometrics for how long, right? You've probably been doing it with your teams for how long, but what's the in-depth coaching that you've done with them, right? Find resources, right? And again, looking at it, it's very simple. Like a plyometric, right? You have to have a counter movement to be a plyometric, right? You have to activate the stretch reflex to be a plyometric movement. So, okay, the slower you go, right, the less of the force production that we're going to get from, that rapid plyometric stretch, right? So it's more details as it relates to muscle spindles and all that, anatomy and physiology stuff. But the general basis behind it's got to have this quick, rapid movement. And too often plyometrics, we don't see that. Too often we're jumping hurdles, right? I saw one the other day. This was a college, right? We go small hurdle, big hurdle, small hurdle, big hurdle, right? And they go over the small hurdle fine, then they hit right away continuous over or they go big hurdle, then small hurdle. But then to get over the big hurdle, right, you got to produce more force. So they're spending more time in contact with the ground. Well, is that the idea of that activity? I don't know, right? It's an Instagram, right? Looks good for Instagram. Personally, like if we're doing an explosive jumping movement, I want to spend the least amount of time in contact with the ground. That hurdle is probably too high. That second hurdle or the third hurdle is probably too high for them in that movement to produce the maximum amount of force in the least amount of time. That's sprinting, right? That's what you do when you base stealing, right? You want to make your sprinters better, right? Simple concepts. Now behind that though, right? If we look back at developing the base of everything, they've got to have a high level of force production first, right? If they can't produce force, they're not going to be able to produce much force very fast, right? So do we need to do all these plyometrics if we can't produce high levels of force, right? So the basics, right? Learning how to produce force, right? And then also doing it with correct technique. Your technique is poor, that can cause compensation patterns. We kind of mentioned that earlier today. You can cause these compensation patterns, and all of a sudden now that caps your movement ability, right? We don't want our athletes' movement abilities to be capped because we were too worried about putting more weight on and not worried about mechanical aspects, right? And so other things that you can look at, long-term athletic development, like where is your athlete, right? A 14-year-old male, they're in a phase where they may, especially those who haven't matured yet, they're not going to gain a lot of strength at that point, right? Because they haven't reached that level of maturity with testosterone and so forth yet to really see a tremendous amount of strength gains. But what they can do, right, is they could really hone in technique. So as they do start to mature, now we can start adding that next piece to it, right? So diving into a little long-term athletic development and seeing, all right, where are my freshmen? My freshman and sophomore class, right? One easy thing in measurement is peak height velocity, right? Take the heights of your athlete, right? And all of a sudden you'll see, right? The kid was, 5'4", 5'4", 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", 5'8". That's peak height velocity, right? And then they start normalizing out again, 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", 5'10", 5'10", right? 5'11", right? And all of a sudden they've seen this massive jump. And then once you've hit peak height velocity, they started to mature, right? Maturation has now come. Now we start moving into a second phase program, their base level program, learning the technique, introducing load, right? Now we start being able to load them, focus bilaterally to unilateral, right? The game is a unilateral game, right? We're always on one foot a lot of the time, right? Swinging, we're on one foot. Pitching, we're on one foot. Running, when the ground contacts, you're only on one foot. Right? But we don't want to start unilateral. We got to develop the base level bilateral strength. And then we start progressing our athletes to that, right? So, again, now you're starting to fine tune things maybe later on, but again, it doesn't have to be that complex. I mean, we can stay basic. Like, we can squat, we can deadlift, right? We can learn and start to develop pillar strength, right? Those movements are great because they require you to brace. Well, that's the game, right? In order to throw a ball, hit a ball, you've got to be able to brace and brace well. Now the game's bracing rotation, right? But we got to learn how to brace first, and then we brace rotation next, right? It's all systematic in how it progresses. And it's just a matter of sitting and talking about that, right? Or sitting and just taking a global step back, like pull back, say, okay, the game, to swing a ball, to swing a bat, to hit a ball, like when I'm in contact, like if I'm not really tight, right, I'm going to lose force out into the bat, and it's just the batted ball velocity is going to be down, right? So I got to figure out how to be really tight through my core and so forth. And everybody knows that, right? And say, okay, well, how do I get there? Well, I got to brace first, right? And so one thing that we do is called the J stick, and we take a PVC pipe, right? And your hands would be on the inside, and my hands are on the outside. I'm the guy in control, right? And so I'm sitting here, and we're both in athletic stance, right? And I'm going to tilt it up. Your job is to keep it parallel. All of a sudden, you're now fighting, right? And so you're locked in, bracing. And then all of a sudden, I'm here, and I quickly change it here. So now you went from bracing this way to now having to change and brace that way. Well, that's the start of the process as it relates to throwing a ball, right? I got to brace this way, and all of a sudden the ball is now out of my hand. I have to change the way in which I brace at that point. And so we're starting to introduce the concepts of this ability to rapid brace change. Right? It's not very complex, right? But that's how you do it. And then all of a sudden it goes from standard bracing to rotational bracing, right? Is now, both of us would be facing the same direction. So you would be here, and now I'm working left and right, right? So now I'll drive you to the right, and you're bracing, and all of a sudden I'll quickly pull you back to the left. Right now I'm in control, right? And then you would be in control, and I don't know when it's going to happen, right? That's the game. Like, we let go of the ball, bracing changes completely, right? How fast you can brace and how effectively you can brace is going to determine, then that could be sprint speed, right? All of a sudden I got to react to a ball, right? And just think about this, right? You're on first base, right? You're taking your secondary lead, right? Ball is hit. You got to then react, right? In order to move, you have to brace, right? All movement originates from the pelvis, right? So you got to brace first. How fast can you do that? Right? You should see when I put people in this movement who have never done it before, slower than molasses when it comes to bracing. I'll pull a senior on then just to do it, like as part of the demo. And all of a sudden it's like, boom, and they're like, I'll pull back and they poof right away. I mean, it is quick, right? Their ability to quickly brace, but that's reactions, right? I don't have to teach reaction time, right? I'm thinking, okay, how do we quickly brace, right? When you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where the ball is going to be hit, but when it is, like that ball's hit right shortstop, I'm going to try to beat that ball out to second, break up the double play, whatever it may be. But if I'm slow at bracing, right, that's going to make my first and second step slow. Now, eventually it may pick back up because I'm fast, but right, you may now be a half step behind. That could be the difference between, right, breaking up the double play, still have a runner on first, right? Late in the game, we're down 1, right? Next guy comes up, hits a double down the line, and we score, versus being called out at second, not breaking up the double play, out at first, game's over. I'm not going to leave it to chance, right? We're going to figure out how do we start working on bracing rapidly, as opposed to sitting on the floor doing abs. Like, who cares? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make you a better ball player, or any sport, to be honest. Right? So I think stay simple. I mean, it's a long-winded answer, right? I mean, it's hard to pick one thing.
Sure.
But yeah, we don't have to overthink it. I mean, too often we do a lot of that, and we really don't. Even in the game, we got like 85 different types of like bunt defenses. Like, we really need all that. I remember, they had like printouts of them. It was like, holy cow! Like, I mean, they bunt the ball freaking like 5 times a freaking season. It seems like when I'm on the mound, I'm only pitching once every 4 days. Like, how many?
You might get one a day. You might get one.
Maybe like watching Major League game, and how many times do we actually have some sort of crazy wheel play? Like the wheel bunt defense play. Wheels, but like obviously you have to be ready for it. But it's we try to make things exceptionally hard, and I don't think we have to.
Sure, no, that's for sure. I was just thinking of like your individual, like, let's say, will coaches come to you, or is it part of your job where you have to say, like, there's a handful of guys that don't brace well? I'm just thinking of the individualization part. Like, when do you bring that in there? Is that just part of everybody just kind of gets that? Or is that part of like, okay, you can kind of tell based on movements that these guys need extra work on that?
Yeah. So it'll start off as like a team concept, right? So like early on, everybody's bracing, right? So like, does the Sky Rayhill, like a senior, does he need the same bracing as a freshman, right? Probably not, right? But we all start there. And part of our attitude and mindset that we take to it is you can always be better at it, right? And so I want you to take that. So don't be upset that you're doing the same thing as a freshman is doing early on, right? Our goal then is to progress through that, right? And so some of those things will start to show you, right? So everything you do should be an evaluation, right? If you're, as a coach, every activity, every ball that's hit, right? Even just hitting fungos, right? That's an evaluation that you're putting in. What could he have done better, right? So it's the same concept. So if we're looking at it, you can see it's like, hey, you know what? This group here, again, you should have paper with you. Like, we're jotting these things down because you can't remember them all, right? Say, man, this person needs this, right? Maybe a little bit of extra work here. They need to stay maybe a little longer doing this, right? And again, it comes back to the culture that's created, is that it's not a knock on you, right? I'm trying to make you the best you, right? And right now, you don't need what he needs, right? He was in the same boat 3 years ago, just like you were, and you got to be willing to accept that. And so there'll be times where we have multiple groups within a same training program, and for example, they're all squatting, right? I've got a guy who's, a 32-inch vert, and I got another guy, same position, who's a 24-inch vert, right? The guy who's a 32-inch vert is also a 2 times his body weight back squat, right? Strong as an ox, right? And explosive, right? So I don't necessarily need to put more strength on this kid, right? It's not going to transfer onto the field, right? So he doesn't need to focus on that. But I can get a 32 to a 33, a 33 to a 34, right? And I can make him more explosive, right? Now, I also need to maintain strength for that kid, right? Because if we don't do it once every 25 plus or minus 5 days, it's going to start to decline, right? So we still have to do it. And at the same time, if I don't do it often enough, every time he does do it, he's going to get sore.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you're sore, right? You've been sore, right? You obviously can't play or perform like you normally can. So I got to manage that aspect as well. And this is the fun part of like really training and program designing and so forth. But anyway, like, he doesn't need what that guy who with a 24-inch who's got, he might be 1.5 times his body weight, right? I mean, that's a low end. That's a class 1 athlete in our book. We're looking for a male, like class 2 would be 1.75. A class 3 would be 2 times their body weight. Obviously, a lot of the athletes that come in are about 1.5 times their body weight. right? And so they've got that development, but their program, they're going to be squatting too, but we might be doing 6-second negatives with them, right? And putting them in under great amounts of tension. But what it's also doing, we're learning how to decelerate better, right? By taking these eccentrics, where our veteran crew, they may not be doing eccentric. They may actually have like a more advanced methodology where they are, post-activating. So they're going concentrically heavy for that set, but then immediately following it by high velocity movement, right? Using a contrast method or a French contrast method, right? Where it's, that, so we can actually use the heavy to help maintain, but then we can post-activate that with a high velocity and start helping to improve their velocity work, right? Well, everybody's squatting. It's just rack 1 is a little bit different than rack 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're similar but different. But I also have, 8 racks in our room. And so being able to watch and manage and all that, I can't have 8 different programs, right? I can't manage that. But if everybody's squatting and I know rack 2 is going to be doing this and rack 3 is going to be doing that, when I go from rack 4 to rack 1, right, I know what rack 1's doing. I know what rack 4 is doing, right? And they may be on different but similar programs. And those are generally made, I'm not saying made live, but they're made, as we're going and what we're seeing, right? We're making the adjustments into the program, using our assessments to better program for them. So they're not fully individualized, but there is a little bit of individualization that gets put in, and so we might see them going through the squat pattern and not like what we see and move them to a front squat. And so all of a sudden now there's 3 guys. All right, you guys are now on rack. Next week you guys are on rack 2 and you're front squatting because we got to get your forward lean is too far, right? Or you got poor ankle mobility that's negatively impacting, right, your hip mechanics. And all right, let's group you 3 together next week, right? So all of a sudden we may be making some slight adjustments. Well, yours is getting better. You're getting stronger. Well, we might move you out and move you up, right? You might have been a guy who was 1.75 times. And over the first 6 weeks, when we mid-test you started now being at 2 times your body weight. Hey, we're moving you onto this group, right? I mean, it's just, again, that's coaching. And does it take time? Yeah, it takes a lot of time, right? But again, how good do you want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could just go in and lift and everybody could do the same thing. And again, that's average, right? I mean, everybody's doing that. It's like, okay, what are we going to do differently that allows us to stand out to be the best? Well, we got to figure it out. We got to do something different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else might be doing it, but I don't know. I doubt
Right.
it.
How much does communication have to do with that? Like you said about like, or is it really just your eyes? Like if a kid, like how much are you valuing a kid's, communication feedback that they're giving you about their ability or their soreness, things like that, where they have,
I think that's a great question. And it starts with the relationship, right? If you've got a bad relationship with the athlete, it's probably not going to go well, right? Whether they're hesitant to tell you everything and so forth. So you really got to open that door up, right? And yeah, again, even in programming, sometimes how you're programming could be that specific. Like we want to create better relationships, right? And so we may not be lifting ideally, right? But we're lifting ideally for the moment we're in. Example, we may have, a high freshman class, right? So a large group of athletes that I haven't been with. Sometimes you have that, right? Where you just see this huge influx, or you have, the one team we had like 13 seniors, right? That's a lot. Like out of a team of 25, like 13 seniors. So everybody else was new, right? And so, I mean, you got to create, like, it's different. It's a whole, every team's always different, but this is like big time, right? So we spent that first like 6-7 weeks just working on creating relationships, right? Focusing on, tiny gains, the focus of tiny gains. Like I need them to really buy into what I'm going to do. If I really want to get into them and, get them working as best as they could, and then start to be able to provide me the feedback, right? So an example of that would be like repetition in reserve, right? There's some days that, again, 1 RMs can fluctuate. It's like a 30% variance, right? 15 and 15, something like that on either end, any given day, right? So I could say, all right, let's do 85% of your 1 RM. But on any given day, 85% could feel like 95 or 100%. Well, that's not what we're trying to accomplish then out of that. So I need you to be able to understand your body and how you feel any given day. Well, a freshman's not ready for that, right? They haven't lifted enough to be able to do that concept. Whereas a senior who lifts and is really into it and knows their body very well, they know when to back off and when to push, right? So as a coach, for me, it's more visual at that point, where I'm looking at roughly how many more reps do you think you could do, right? So I'm looking at how fast the bar's moving, things like that. But then I'll always ask you, and they probably don't have any clue why I'm even asking, because I won't really address this. Like, how many more you think you've done? Yeah, I think I could have done like 4 or 5 more. Okay, cool. And I just move on. I'm like, what the heck is he talking about? Well, like, all I'm doing is getting you to understand your body and how you feel, right? And then, in week like 3 or 4, now I ask you again, and you still say, I think I could have done 4 more. Well, I know what our repetition reserve was supposed to be, like a 1-2. All right, increase your weight. Right, we did it today. We had a team in this afternoon. Same thing, right? Their push today was that we were doing eccentric loading and it was assisted reps. So he only had 2 reps, and the second of the 2 reps was supposed to be assisted beginning on set 2. And then after set 2, both rep 1 and 2 were supposed to be assisted. We're pushing to be assisted. Now, some people are trying to, but they hesitate. They're afraid to put the load in. They don't want to fail, right? Things like that. So again, you're getting these opportunities. Like, no, I want you to fail, right? And when you fail at this, like, you're actually doing it the right way, and we're going to learn from it. It's like we start to learn what our bodies are capable of doing and not capable of doing, and at the same time, so we have these athletes and they're going down in this 6-second negative, right? And then they press, right? Or they stand, and they didn't have the assistance. Well, I mean, these are college athletes, so they have the ability to do this. Maybe I wouldn't do it with younger athletes, but conceptually I'd figure out a way to go about doing it. And, they're getting up easy. It's like, all right, we got to increase the weight. Like, we can't figure out, you got to figure this out. Like, we're not waiting till the last set. So I'm like, I was telling an athlete, I said, I average about 20,000 steps a day. Right. And, in that, I'll work in that 20,000 steps. I have 2 teams, right, that I'm working with, 4 sessions. Right. So like, I'm here, there, everywhere. Right. Like, I'm seeing you over there while I'm watching this one here. I'm going to talk with you here, and then I'm beelining over to the other side, right? Because I got to get to that person, right? We're back. I could just stand in the middle and do nothing, right? And then give you a little bit here, a little bit there, but they deserve more than that. So, I mean, it's that relationship is critical to build, and that's your foundation. And their willingness to, we do RPEs, right? So rate of perceived exertion. And that's part of some of the metrics, the data that we use, technology concepts to assess readiness and recovery and things along that line. And so, like, how hard was practice today? Well, like, why are you going to go tell coach? Like, this is how it started. Like, are you going to go tell coach? Like, no, like, I'm not. Like, I really, like, no. Like, I want you to be honest with me. Like, yeah, I'm going to go tell coach. Like, it's a report that I'm filing. Yes, I mean, but like, who cares? Right? Just like, coach is not going to say, oh, he didn't work hard today, because that's the case. We got a bad culture to begin with. Like, if you're willing to lie to me about how hard practice was, right, we're never going to be as successful as we could be. Right. And so, like, that's just, I'll tell you, like, yeah, you're right. Like, okay. Right. If you didn't work hard today, right, then maybe you got to figure that part out yourself. Right. If you're thinking here sitting like, yeah, I'm going to tell him it was an 8 when it was, when I really only gave a 6 today, you got bigger issues, and so we'll talk about that stuff, and just throw it out there and, laugh at it and joke about it. But they eventually do, we don't really have people that lie. Like, there's no need. Like, my goal is to make you the best athlete possible. If your willingness to lie, I can tell you this, it ain't going to happen, and we're involved excuse me, we're involved with program design in terms of like practice intensities and session durations and things along that line to manage workload. And, I was talking with our field hockey coach the other day, and one thing that we're seeing is like our monotony, right? The level of intensity of the training sessions from day to day are staying very similar. Now, like the durations may change, right? But the intensity, so if you have like a 90-minute practice and the intensity is coming in at an 8 for 90 minutes, that's the same as a 120-minute 6.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Same exact relative score. You're both so, yeah, well, we didn't go as long, but you went a little harder, and they're very monotonous. And so what ends up happening is that can negatively impact recovery. So the freshness and how they recover from session to session can all be impacted and things like that. And so we want to see more of like a high-low variation where we have a high day, a low day, moderate day, and kind of fluctuations throughout the training period. And, trying to create that. In game baseball, it's a little bit more difficult, because you'll have, especially with playing, right, where you'll play a doubleheader in a day, especially at the college level, you have guys who sit on the bench and don't play at all, right? So they're scoring it as like a 2, and these other guys are scoring that day like a catcher who played both games is scoring that as like a freaking like 12.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, like
Right.
Their day is a 10. And so like it becomes a little bit more individually managed. And, we can look at, acute chronics, like what's the past 7 days versus the past 21 days look like, right? So there's a lot of cool details that we can start to pull out of this to really help better the athlete. But again, it goes back to it. If you're willing to not provide the truth, then we got other issues that we got to figure out first. And that goes back to the culture, I think.
Yeah, and the relationship, like you said, the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, it's all really good stuff, man. Like crazy good stuff, and I think it just goes to show, like, just the vital role that you play, in developing the culture. And it's you've been a part of so many national championships. It all just proves that it's so valuable. You get a different side, and I'm sure the evaluation, the feedback you give the coaches is pretty valuable as well. And
well, one of the hard things that we have is, I don't get to work with every team, right? And so we have GAs fluctuating in every 2 years, right? And so this is challenging. This is where like it really hones in on what you just said, that, having the continuity is critical, right, for that culture, right? As new coaches are coming in and coaches are going out, that's where I am noticing, right, culture changes, right? And generally, we very rarely see culture growth. We typically see culture decline in the fluctuation, because you're bringing in a strength coach who's 22 years old and has never had. I mean, we got a strength coach who's 22 years old who is in charge of a national championship baseball team, right? Like it's their show. And part of why I give that is because they work their freaking tail off. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one less thing for that strength coach to have to really worry about, but yeah, like you're 22 years old and you're in charge of the national championship team. Like what a great experience, first off, right? Well, expectations are high. But yeah, I mean, and then 2 years later, they're going to get somebody new. So over the course of your time as a player, you're going to see 2 different strength coaches for some of our teams. And, one of the good things with Coach Sires is building that culture is super strong, right, from that end too. Jim Berkman, men's across, their culture is so high. Women's lacrosse culture is very high. Field hockey, a lot of teams that are highly successful, basketballs have really grown tremendously over the past 5 years, 5 to 10 years. Really, really seen a lot of great improvements there. And, so it's they do it on that end too, right? They really push that concept on their end. And I think that's a huge part. And then we just, sublet that the rest of the year. But it's hard for the 22-year-old coach to figure out all that stuff. And that's where we see the decline, unfortunately. And that's the hard part. That's what bugs me every day, or drives me batty, I think, every day, is because like I know what we could do. I know what we could be. I just can't do it all myself, unfortunately. And we educate.
Right.
And year 2 is always better for them, but then they're gone again, and then we're right back to the start, And so I haven't quite figured that one out yet.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think everybody has their challenges. It's different. Like I just talked to the West Virginia performance coach, and he's only has to do with baseball.
Yeah.
Like they each have each of their own guys. So yeah, that's just a different challenge, and every level is different. And but it's still so valuable. I think for me, just even the education for people knowing that one, even at the high school level, at the lowest levels, you need to be reaching out to a performance coach. You need to be understanding of it. Try to be talking to your strength and conditioning coach at the high school, if where you're at. It's just so valuable with what
100%.
you can see, even from an individual standpoint of how they compete in there, and like you said earlier about like marrying the concepts that we're trying to teach from a mental standpoint to bring into the weight room, like, because that really goes to show, like, do you see guys afraid to fail? Do you see guys competing? Do you see guys trying so hard and maybe they're killing themselves and not recovering enough? Like, I think that tells into like the kind of person they're going to be like when they're in a slump. Guys in a slump are just
100%.
gonna. You have a certain guys that like will the guys that don't recover and they push themselves to like, well, they're just overexert themselves, probably will do that when they're in a slump too, and they're not going to get any better.
Yeah.
Like, so it's good to see those kind of things. I think you should see a different type of the person, and
You
and
know,
I love.
the concepts, like they're not really complex, right? I mean, they're like, to me, it's like even just sitting here talking now, it's like all we're doing is just we're taking a step back and saying like how basic, like, you know what I mean? Like how basic can we be and how great can we be at basic? To me, that's really what it is. It's just this, let's just pull ourselves back of this, I just went to this clinic and I learned all this stuff and I've got all this knowledge. That's cool. But how can we simplify everything to be very basic, but yet be exceptionally good at those concepts, right? And like you're saying, it's just like taking the mental approach to an at bat. We all know what's the cliche, right? The game's 90% mental, right? But how many times do we even work on that? Like we all know it, but we're so worried about the skills, yet the one thing that's going to screw everything up, right, is the 6 inches between your ears, right? It's the same thing we talk about commitment. Like if you're not committed to want to work to get better, you're not going to get better, right? So let's simplify it. Let's figure out where you sit and let's figure out how we get better. That's simplifying it. Take the game or whatever the skill is back to the simplest form and then figure out how to progress it from there. I don't think we just want to jump to the end, right? And that's the Tower of Hanoi, right? The same concept. Everybody wants to win the game. They want to get to the end, but not simplify the process as it goes, which will result in a better end, right? Or better outcome.
For sure.
But
Awesome
that's our
stuff.
society today,
No, for sure. For sure. I think the compound effect too, and they kind of when you bring in the money thing like that, so another great book is Compound Effect, Darren Hardy,
Oh yeah, yeah, it
one
is.
of my top fives. Awesome stuff, man. Coach Nine, best way for guys to contact you, want to talk some more stuff, maybe like let's say this guy that wants to reach out to a sports performance coach, what might be the best way to do that?
Yes, in my email, manein@salisbury.edu. Just shoot me an email. Again, if you want to DM me on Facebook or hit me up on Instagram. I don't even know what my Instagram tag is. You have to throw that in the show notes.
Okay.
But yeah, email is probably the best. And then again, reach out. Like you said, like it doesn't have to just be me. Like reach out to anybody. You'd be amazed how open people are, especially in the sport. From me just being in the sport performance field, me reach out to anybody. I've probably in the last 2 or 3 days, I got a call tomorrow. Waiting to hear back from another guy when we're talking next week. Just about different concepts. And when I'm learning from them and they're learning from me, I mean, half an hour, 20 minutes, like, I don't care. Like, if you can give me 5 minutes, that's awesome. Right. I took a call the other day. I was like, all right, I got to be at training. I got to start setting up in 5 minutes. All right. You got 5 minutes. What's the best question you got? Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, cool. Like, can we call you another time? Yeah, absolutely. And, it was like just enough for them to be okay. And it helped them out in the immediate. And then I can get to them like next week a little bit more. We can really sit down and talk a little bit more. And, it's just reach out, man. You can't. Here's the thing, right? Worst case scenario, they say no. You're in the
Mm-hmm.
same spot, right? You're in the same exact position. But what happens if they say yes? What happens if they say, hey, why don't you come visit? Right? I mean, heck, something like that could even turn into a job, right?
Absolutely.
And we do this with our interns, right? Just as a quick example. So people are like, oh, he's just bullshit. No, like they have to call 3 coaches, right? So minimum, you have to call 3 strength coaches, right? I don't care who they are, but you got to call them, right? So you got to set up an appointment, email, like do all these things, right? We want to look at your questions, right? Make sure that you're professional because you're representing our program, right? And so this guy ends up calling the strength coaches at Oregon. By the end of the conversation, he had a summer internship.
Oh
Like,
man, it's great.
Like they felt genuine. Like it wasn't like he was learning, wanted to grow, wanted to learn, didn't want to like, wasn't trying to be somebody he wasn't, and it was cool. And like, I mean, it's like, yeah, you never know. Like, going into that, did he ever think that would happen? Absolutely not. I mean, one of our strength coaches who worked with baseball for their international championship, the reason he was at Salisbury is because he came to visit. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He came to visit to see our program. By the end of the day, he had a GA position, right? Just like that. And said, the only way, though, that you're going to get this GA position, you got to get one more internship, right? So he ends up going and interning at Towson. By the time he was done at Towson for that summer internship, he had an internship for the following summer at Iowa, right?
Mm.
By the time, so he comes back to us then, has his first semester, right? Or second semester, or it was his third semester now with us. He's got one more semester. He gets a phone call from the strength coach at Iowa, right, saying, you're going to hear from this guy because you're my number one. Well, the guy at Towson also was an assistant at Iowa. The guy who was looking for the job was an assistant at Iowa, right? So not knowing that this guy had talked to this guy up here also called this guy over here, right? This guy said the same name, right? Just like that, he left, took a job full time, right? Hadn't even graduated grad school yet, full time job, left us at the end of the third semester, man. And he's a freaking rock star, right?
Yeah.
You never know, right? You never know. He came and visited, ended up with a GA. Within a year and a half, he was a full time assistant strength coach FBS program.
That's awesome.
And he'll get a ring here in a month.
Never know, man. That's right. You just talk out, call them. People just want to talk, and absolutely, man. Love it. This is awesome, man. I really appreciate you, man, taking some time, man. This was really educational. I think the absolute, just great knowledge, man. A ton of knowledge, man. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it, man. Anytime. Love to chat with you next time you're down.
Coach Matt Nein from Salisbury, just giving us some great information. I just loved all the stuff that he talked about, from the different lessons that they're trying to teach within, and being authentic and allowing what he called opportunities for when he hears them say certain things or when their conversation's happening, to be authentic and be open, knowing when times that he just needs to build relationships so he can have trust in order to give them feedback, and when they're giving him feedback and what he can trust. Love how they talk about his Iron Sammy, competing against other teams, and they're talking about the Tower of Hanoi and him doing that competition, which is keeping them and using those skills that they're going to relate to and see them in the field, so then they can realize that this is how they're going to be able to practice them. I think so many times, and I know some people are doing a great job of this within the classroom, but there might be times where you just don't get a chance to talk about those mental skills or get to practice them. And the weight room is a great time for that. The weight room allows people to see that, where you can focus on the moment. If you're not, you're going to get hurt. If you're not, no way you're putting up the weight rate, the right weight, and the best you can. If you're not in the moment, if you're afraid to fail, so many different lessons can come out of that, and I think that you hear that through Coach Nein in his message, being able to relate the concepts in the moment for what we're doing in the weight room to on the field. Those are great, powerful things, and also then being able to relate it later on in the program. Crazy. I love the 6 components. His 6 components in the weight room, from lifting to mental skills, the physical skills, nutrition, recovery, conditioning, and lifting. All fantastic things. Understanding, knowing that the mental skills are just as important as the physical. He brings all that in, and that's the most important part is the 6 inches between our brain. Assessing commitment, I think I could have definitely dove into more of that. Would have been even longer, but I think that's definitely something that people could reach out to him, continue to reach out to him at MA9 NEIN at salisbury.edu. But that the assessment commitment, how he's assessing commitment, is pretty interesting. Again, I think if you're not measuring it, how would you know? Weightlifting definitely has an easy way of doing that, but I love the assessment commitment. I'm very, very curious. I definitely would reach out to him myself even about that, just to kind of get more information. He did give out the book about Jeff Jansen, Commitment Continuum, but define the stuff, assessing, measure. You could just really just come up with your own stuff. It's really just about that, like being able to say, here's how we're going to do, here's what we're about, and here's where you're going to get 5 points for doing this, and 4 points for doing this, and 3, however you need to manage it. Because like he said, I can't give everybody because I just can't manage that. So he knows where he knows limitations, he knows what he can do, and that's what he can manage. And that's what it's all about. So he's owning his own program, and that's what really good coaches do. So Coach Nein, can't thank you enough, man. All great stuff. Again, thank you guys for sticking with us. Thank Will Miner, those guys at Netting Pros. Check those guys out. Let me know if you have any feedback for me at TreyTCobb@gmail.com. Check us out on Twitter. Always putting stuff out on Facebook as well. We have a page on Facebook, and I just can't thank you enough for the support, and keep it coming, and let's continue to get better. So thank you again for everybody. Coach Nein, appreciate you. Until next week, keep getting better.